They tried to evict me from my own cabin, until I revealed I owned the lake they fished in and the only parking lot they needed. The cabin had stood on the shore of Willow Lake for nearly a century, built by my grandfather's calloused hands when the land was nothing but wild pine and marsh. It wasn't much to look at from the outside: weathered cedar siding, a tin roof that rattled in summer storms, and a porch that sagged just enough to complain under your boots. But it was mine. More than that, it was family. Every board, every nail, every stone in the fireplace was tied to memories that no HOA could touch. When I returned after years in the city, I wanted quiet, fishing at dawn, firewood crackling at night, the kind of peace money couldn't buy. What I didn't expect was that, while I was gone, the woods had been carved into a sprawling development, Maple Shores Estates. Rows of cookie-cutter houses had sprouted where deer used to graze. And with them came the thing I despised most, an HOA run by people who thought their rules carried more weight than the law itself. At first, I kept to myself. My cabin was tucked on the far edge of the lake, my dock hidden by reeds. I nodded politely when joggers passed my dirt road, ignored the fancy SUVs lined up at the new clubhouse, and stayed out of their politics. But I knew sooner or later, someone would notice the one house on the lake that didn't match their community aesthetic. That someone came in the form of Karen Whitfield, HOA president, clipboard warrior, and self-appointed queen of Maple Shores. The first time I saw her, she was measuring her neighbor's mailbox height with a ruler. The second time, she was knocking on my door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't open. I never did for people like her. The cabin, she would soon learn, was more than a home. It sat on land with deep roots. Land that came with rights. And rights, in the wrong hands, or the right ones, could become weapons. I wasn't looking for a fight, but the HOA was about to drag me into one. And when they did, they would discover the truth: I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the lake they fished in, and the parking lot every one of their residents needed. Karen never traveled alone. By the time she showed up at my cabin for the third time, she brought 2 board members in tow: Richard, a man with an inflated chest and too much cologne, and Susan, who clutched papers like they were weapons. They stood on my porch as if they owned it, knocking, then banging until I finally opened the door. Karen's smile stretched thin. "Hello. You must be Mr. Carter. We've had a few concerns brought to the HOA board regarding your property." "Property?" I asked flatly. "Yes, your cabin. It doesn't align with the architectural guidelines of Maple Shores. The paint is faded, the roof doesn't conform to community standards, and," she gestured toward my dock, "that structure is unapproved." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "This cabin was here before your development existed." Richard puffed out his chest. "Still, all residents of Maple Shores are subject to the rules." "That's funny," I said, my voice low. "Because I'm not a resident of Maple Shores. I never signed your covenant, never joined your association, and never will." Susan shoved a paper toward me. "You'll need to bring the property into compliance, or face fines. Continued non-compliance could result in eviction." Eviction. That word lit a fuse. They thought they could scare me off my own land with papers and signatures. I didn't take the notice. I simply closed the door in their faces. From the other side, Karen called out, her voice sharp and brittle, "We'll see you at the next board meeting." I didn't answer. I was already planning my next move. If they wanted to play games, they had no idea I held the winning hand. The following week, I found a bright orange paper nailed to my front door. The nails were driven so deep they left dents in the wood, as if the enforcer wanted to leave scars. In heavy, block letters across the top it read, "Violation Notice." Beneath the headline was a neatly typed list of supposed infractions. Asterisk, non-standard dwelling. Asterisk, unapproved dock. Asterisk, unpermitted fire pit. Each accusation was laughable, but what came next nearly made me choke with amusement. Failure to comply within 30 days may result in legal action, including eviction. I stood there on my porch, the paper flapping in the evening breeze, and laughed. Evict me? From my own land? The land my grandfather purchased when half this county was still wilderness. The cabin I had built with my own hands, using timber I milled myself. It was absurd. But absurdity was exactly how HOAs thrived. They lived on a steady diet of intimidation. They counted on fear of fines, fear of endless lawyers, fear of being ostracized by the neighborhood machine. They assumed people would cower before their letters stamped in bold. They assumed wrong. Instead of tearing the notice down, I left it nailed to the door. Not because I accepted their authority, but because I wanted every neighbor who passed by to see it. It wasn't a warning. It was a trophy. Proof of their arrogance. That night, as the fire in my stove crackled low, I pulled on my jacket and headed into town. The county records office wasn't exactly buzzing with activity after hours, but its lights still glowed. The clerk, a gray-haired woman with readers perched on her nose, barely looked up as I approached the counter. "I need the full plat maps for Willow Lake and all surrounding parcels," I said. Her head lifted, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "That's quite a lot of paper. You looking to buy?" "Not exactly," I replied, sliding a request form across the counter. "I'd also like ownership records, water rights, easements, every document tied to the development." She raised an eyebrow. "That's all of it?" "That's right." The printer groaned to life, spitting out thick packets of maps and deeds, each stamped with county seals. My smile grew wider with every page. I traced the black lines with my finger, noting boundaries, property divisions, right-of-way markings. She finally asked, half joking, half wary, "Planning to sell?" I stacked the documents neatly under my arm, the weight of history and legality pressing against me like armor. "Not exactly," I said, allowing a slow, deliberate smile to spread across my face. "I'm planning to remind some people what they don't own." The clerk tilted her head, studying me with new interest, but said nothing more. When I stepped back into the night, the cool air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. The stars glittered above the dark silhouette of the hills that framed my lake. Their lake, they thought. Their community. Their rules. But the papers in my arms said otherwise. War had been declared, but it would not be fought with fines and notices. It would be fought with deeds, boundaries, and rights written in ink decades before any HOA president had even been born. And I already knew who would win. The air in the Maple Shores clubhouse was thick with the scent of overbrewed coffee and nervous anticipation. The HOA board meeting had been in full swing for nearly an hour, and the room buzzed with the self-important chatter of homeowners in their pressed shirts and tailored dresses, clutching their agendas like shields. On the wall, posters of community guidelines loomed, their bold fonts proclaiming platitudes like "Together we thrive" and "Respect our shared spaces." The irony wasn't lost on me as I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside, uninvited. Karen, the board president, froze mid-sentence, her manicured hand hovering over a stack of papers. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The other board members, Richard with his perpetual scowl, Linda with her pearl necklace and pinched expression, and Tom, who always looked like he'd rather be golfing, turned to stare. The homeowners in the audience, a mix of retirees and young professionals who treated these meetings like high-stakes diplomacy, whispered to each other. I could feel their judgment, sharp as the creases in their clothes. "Mr. Carter," Karen said, recovering with the speed of someone who'd spent years perfecting her composure. Her voice was honeyed, but there was venom beneath it. "Glad you could join us. We were just discussing your violations." I didn't sit. Instead, I walked to the front of the room, my boots thudding against the polished hardwood. In my hands were the documents I'd spent weeks digging up from the county records office, yellowed pages, faded ink, and the kind of legal weight that could silence a room. I unrolled them with deliberate care, letting the rustle of paper fill the tense silence. Violations? I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry. That's interesting. Because according to these records, I held up the first document, a surveyor's map from 1948, I don't live in Maple Shores. My land predates your development by 70 years. My grandfather's deed was signed when this place was nothing but farmland and willow trees. I never signed your covenants, Karen. And legally, your board has no jurisdiction over my property. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Richard, the treasurer who fancied himself a lawyer because he'd once watched a season of Law and Order, leaned forward, his face reddening. Now, hold on a minute, Carter. I raised a hand, cutting him off. I'm not done. I flipped to another page, this one a certified copy of the original land grant. While you've been busy sending me notices about my mailbox being non-compliant and my fence being 2 inches too tall, you overlooked something important. This here, I tapped the deed with a calloused finger, is the original grant for Willow Lake and the adjacent land. That includes the only paved lot by the clubhouse. You know, the one where all of you park. The room went silent. Faces paled. Karen's perfectly lined lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, her confidence cracked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. The homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their coffee cups forgotten. Linda clutched her pearls like they might save her. I let the moment hang, savoring it. You've been fining me for years, threatening to lien my property, even talking about eviction. But here's the thing, I don't answer to you. Never have. And if you push this any further, I'll chain off that parking lot tomorrow morning. Let's see how Maple Shores runs when no one has a place to park their shiny SUVs. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, chaos erupted. Voices overlapped as homeowners turned to each other, some whispering, others shouting questions. Richard slammed a fist on the table, demanding to see the documents. Linda looked like she might faint. Tom just stared at his phone, probably wishing he'd stayed on the golf course. Karen stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd, she snapped, her voice regaining its edge. You can't just waltz in here with some old papers and expect to dismantle our community. We have rules, Mr. Carter. Rules that keep Maple Shores a desirable place to live. Desirable? I shot back, stepping closer to the board's table. You mean desirable for people who can afford your fines and your landscaping fees? My family's been on this land since before your community was a blueprint. You built your fancy houses around me, and now you think you can bully me into submission because my barn doesn't match your color palette? A few homeowners gasped. Others nodded, their faces betraying a mix of guilt and curiosity. I could see the divide forming, those who saw me as a troublemaker and those who were starting to question the HOA's iron grip. Richard stood now, pointing a finger at me. You're bluffing. That lot's been used by the community for years. You can't just claim it now. Squatters' rights don't apply when you've got the original deed, I said, holding up the document again. I've got the law on my side, and I've got a lawyer who's very interested in this case. So go ahead, Richard. Try to evict me. But when you do, I'll make sure every car in that lot is towed by noon. Karen's face was a mask of barely contained fury. This meeting is adjourned, she said, her voice tight. We'll review these claims and reconvene next week. No, I said, my tone firm. You don't get to dismiss this. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to tell you that your reign over my land ends now. You want to talk violations? Let's talk about the unpermitted drainage system your contractors installed that's flooding my pasture. Or the fact that your community lake is on my property line, and I never approved the dredging. The room was a powder keg now, and I'd just lit the fuse. A woman in the back, one of the newer residents, stood up. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are we trespassing?" Karen shot her a look that could have curdled milk. "Mrs. Thompson, sit down. This is under control." But it wasn't. I could see it in the way the homeowners exchanged glances, the way their whispers grew louder. For years, the HOA had ruled Maple Shores like a fiefdom, levying fines, enforcing rules, and silencing dissent. But now, I'd cracked the facade, and the truth was spilling out. I rolled up the documents and tucked them under my arm. "I'm not your enemy," I said, addressing the room. "I just want to live on my land in peace. But if you come for me, I'll come for you. And I've got 70 years of history on my side." As I turned to leave, I heard Karen call after me, her voice sharp but unsteady. "This isn't over, Carter." I didn't look back. "It better be," I said, and pushed through the door into the cool night air. Outside, the stars were bright above Willow Lake, and the crickets sang like they didn't have a care in the world. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling to life, and glanced at the clubhouse in my rearview mirror. The lights were still on, and I could imagine the chaos I'd left behind, Karen scrambling to regain control, Richard shouting about legal action, and the homeowners wondering if they'd been lied to all along. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe they'd fight me. Maybe they'd back down. But one thing was certain, Maple Shores would never be the same. The deeper I dug into the county records, the better it got. My grandfather, a stubborn old man with a knack for foresight, hadn't just secured ownership of Willow Lake in the 1930s. He'd also quietly acquired a small, unassuming parcel of land adjacent to it, a rectangle of dirt that, decades later, would become the Maple Shores clubhouse parking lot. Back then, the county had leased that parcel for public access, a deal inked in fading cursive on yellowed ledger pages. But when Maple Shores sprouted up in the early 2000s, with its manicured lawns and cookie-cutter McMansions, the developers made a fatal mistake. They paved over that lot, slapped a private property sign on it, and called it theirs, without ever buying the land. It was ironclad. The title was clear, the boundaries marked in black ink on a surveyor's map so precise it could have been carved in stone. The HOA didn't own the lake they'd branded as their private community asset. They didn't own the asphalt lot where their residents parked their gleaming SUVs every day. I did. And I had the documents to prove it. I spent a late night at my kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the papers spread out before me. The deed to Willow Lake, the original land grant, the county lease agreement, every piece of the puzzle fit together perfectly. My grandfather had been a meticulous man, the kind who kept every receipt and filed his taxes a month early. Thanks to him, I held a legal trump card that could bring the Maple Shores HOA to its knees. I wasn't about to let this sit. The HOA had been hounding me for years, fines for my non-compliant mailbox, citations for my fence's height, even a threat to lien my property over a patch of unmowed grass during a drought. They'd treated me like a squatter on my own land, and now I had the chance to turn the tables. I drove to the local print shop the next morning, the documents tucked carefully in a leather folder. I made 3 sets of copies, each page crisp and official, and had them bound into sleek black folders. One for me, one for my lawyer, and one for the HOA. Back home, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, drafting a note to accompany the package. I kept it short and sharp, letting the documents do most of the talking. Next time you threaten eviction, read your own deeds first. The lake and the parking lot aren't yours. They never were. James Carter. I sealed the folder in a padded envelope, drove to the post office, and mailed it certified to the Maple Shores HOA office. As the clerk stamped the receipt, I felt a spark of satisfaction. The fuse was lit. Now I just had to sit back and watch the fireworks. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. I went about my routine, feeding the chickens, tending the vegetable garden, and checking the fences along my property line. But every time I passed Willow Lake, its still waters reflecting the autumn sky, I couldn't help but grin. The HOA had built their entire identity around that lake: picnics, paddleboat rentals, even their annual Maple Shores Regatta. They'd sold it as the heart of their community, a selling point for every overpriced house in the development. And all along, it had been mine. I didn't hear from Karen or the board directly, but the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. My neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, who'd lived on the outskirts of Maple Shores longer than I had, stopped by with a thermos of coffee and a smirk. "Heard you stirred up a hornet's nest, Carter," he said, leaning against my porch railing. "Folks at the clubhouse are losing their minds. Karen's been on the phone with lawyers all week." "Good," I said, taking a sip of his coffee. It was strong enough to wake a coma patient. "Let her sweat. She's been lording over this place like it's her personal kingdom for too long." Jenkins chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "You really own that parking lot?" "And the lake," I said, tapping the folder on the table beside me. "They didn't do their homework when they built this place. Now they're gonna learn." He whistled low. "You're a braver man than me, Carter. They'll come for you, you know. Karen doesn't like losing." "Let them try," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I've got the law on my side, and I'm not backing down." By the end of the week, the first signs of fallout appeared. A nervous-looking man in a polo shirt knocked on my door, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as Greg, the HOA's compliance officer, though his shaky voice suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Carter," he said, glancing at his notes, "I'm here to discuss a misunderstanding about the property boundaries." "Misunderstanding?" I said, crossing my arms. "There's no misunderstanding. You've got my package by now. You know the truth." Greg swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "The board is reviewing your claims, but in the meantime, we'd like to propose a meeting to discuss." "No meeting," I cut him off. "You've got the documents. You've got my terms. If Karen wants to talk, she can come here herself. But I'm not stepping foot in that clubhouse to be ambushed again." He stammered something about community cooperation and scurried off, his clipboard clutched like a lifeline. I watched him drive away, his sedan bouncing over the gravel road that led back to Maple Shore's pristine streets. That night, I sat on my porch, the crickets chirping and the lake shimmering under the moonlight. I could almost feel the storm brewing, the HOA scrambling to cover their tracks, the residents whispering about what this meant for their precious community. I didn't know how far they'd push back, but I was ready. The documents were my armor, and the truth was my weapon. The next morning, I woke to find a letter slipped under my door, the Maple Shores logo embossed on the envelope. It was from Karen, requesting an urgent meeting to resolve this matter amicably. Her words were polite, but I could read the panic between the lines. I set the letter on my table, next to the deed, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The fireworks were just getting started. The Maple Shores HOA didn't waste time licking their wounds. By the next evening, after my certified package landed in their office, Karen and her board cronies called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, demanding my presence. The notice arrived in my mailbox, printed on crisp letterhead with the Maple Shores logo, a stylized willow tree that now felt like a mockery. They wanted me to stand in their polished room, under their community guidelines posters, and negotiate on their terms. I wasn't playing their game. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where my grandfather used to sketch out plans for the farm, and drafted a response. One page, typed, no room for misinterpretation. I stapled it to a fresh copy of the Willow Lake deed, the ink of its boundaries as clear as the day it was signed in 1938. Effective immediately, any use of Willow Lake or the adjacent lot will require my written permission. Unauthorized use will be considered trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. James Carter. I mailed it certified, same as before, and let the weight of the words settle in my mind. This wasn't a bluff. It was a line in the sand. The next morning, I was up before dawn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and pine from the lake's edge. I loaded my truck with steel posts, a coil of heavy chain, and a stack of signs I'd had printed at the hardware store. Each one read, in bold black letters, private property. Owner, Carter family. No trespassing. By 7 a.m., I was at the clubhouse parking lot, driving posts into the ground at the entrance. The chains went up next, their metallic clinks echoing in the quiet morning as I secured them with padlocks that gleamed in the early light. I hung the signs evenly, making sure they were visible from every angle. No one could claim they didn't see them. By noon, the chaos began. Homeowners arrived in their polished SUVs and sedans, expecting to park for their yoga classes, book clubs, or boat ramp access to Willow Lake. Instead, they found my chains blocking the lot. Cars circled, engines idling, drivers craning their necks to read the signs. Some honked, as if that would magically open the gate. Others got out, squinting at the padlocks, muttering to each other in disbelief. I watched from the edge of my property, leaning against a fence post, a thermos of coffee in hand. The first to confront me was Mrs. Thompson, the nervous new resident from the last meeting. She marched over, her yoga mat tucked under her arm, her face flushed with indignation. "Mr. Carter, this is outrageous. I have a class in 10 minutes. Where am I supposed to park?" "On the street," I said, nodding toward the narrow road that wound through Maple Shores. "Or you can walk. It's only half a mile from your place." Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. "This is our community lot." "Not according to the deed," I said, patting the rolled-up copy in my jacket pocket. "You've been parking on my land for years. That ends today." She stormed off, muttering about lawyers, but she wasn't the last. A steady stream of residents came by, some pleading, others threatening. One guy, a slick type in a polo shirt who probably sold insurance, tried to bribe me with $100 to unlock the chain for the day. I just pointed to the sign and sipped my coffee. By mid-afternoon, Karen arrived, her heels clicking furiously on the gravel as she stormed toward me. Her face was a mask of rage, her usual composure replaced by something raw and desperate. "You can't do this," she shouted, stopping just short of the chain. "This lot is essential to our community. You're holding us hostage." I leaned against the chain, letting it sway slightly under my weight. "I just did," I said, meeting her glare. "You've been trespassing on my land for years, Karen. Sending me fines, threatening to evict me from my own home. You didn't think there'd be consequences." Her hands clenched into fists, her manicured nails digging into her palms. "This is extortion. We'll sue you into the ground, Carter. You think you can take on the entire HOA?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I don't need to take you on, Karen. I've got the law, the deed, and the truth. You built your whole community on a lie, and now it's catching up with you. Sue me if you want. But every lawyer in the county will see those documents and tell you the same thing: you don't have a leg to stand on." Her eyes narrowed, but I saw the flicker of doubt. She wasn't used to losing, but she wasn't stupid either. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The crowd behind her, homeowners who'd gathered to watch the showdown, shifted uneasily, their murmurs growing louder. I could hear fragments of their conversations. Did he really own the lake? How did the board miss this? What happens now? Karen turned to them, raising her hands like a politician calming a mob. "Everyone, please, go home. The board will handle this. We'll have a resolution soon." "Better make it quick," I called after her as she retreated to her car. "Because those chains aren't coming down until I say so." She didn't respond, just climbed into her sleek black sedan and sped off, tires spitting gravel. The crowd dispersed slowly, some throwing dirty looks my way, others looking at the ground, as if ashamed to meet my eyes. I stayed by the chain, watching the last of the cars pull away. The lot sat empty, the asphalt gleaming under the afternoon sun, a silent testament to the power of a single piece of paper. That evening, I walked the perimeter of Willow Lake, the water lapping gently against the shore. The willows swayed in the breeze, their branches casting long shadows across the surface. My grandfather used to bring me here as a kid, teaching me how to fish, telling stories about the land and the people who'd lived on it before us. He'd always said, "This lake's got a soul, James. Don't let anyone take it from you." I hadn't understood then, but I did now. This wasn't just about a parking lot or a deed. It was about legacy, about standing up to people who thought they could rewrite history with money and rules. The HOA could fight me all they wanted, but I had the truth, and I wasn't letting go. As I headed back to my house, I noticed a new email on my phone. It was from Karen, sent from the HOA's official account, requesting a private meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial solution. I chuckled, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat of my truck. Mutually beneficial, my ass. They were scrambling, and I was just getting started. The chains were up, and the fight was on. The neighborhood descended into chaos overnight, as if my chains on the parking lot had unraveled the delicate threads holding Maple Shores together. Without access to the clubhouse lot, residents were forced to park on the narrow side streets, their gleaming SUVs and sedans clogging cul-de-sacs and blocking mailboxes. Driveways became battlegrounds, with homeowners shouting at each other over who had the right to park where. By morning, the community's pristine facade had cracked, replaced by honking horns, angry gestures, and the kind of petty disputes that only a disrupted routine can ignite. The HOA's inbox overflowed with complaints. Residents flooded the board with emails and voicemails, furious about the inconvenience, the blocked access to the boat ramp, and the sudden realization that their private lake wasn't so private after all. I heard about it from Jenkins, who stopped by with his usual thermos of coffee and a grin wider than the lake itself. "They're tearing each other apart out there, Carter," he said, chuckling. Mrs. Thompson nearly ran over the Wilsons' mailbox trying to squeeze her car in. And Richard's been yelling at everyone to calm down, like he's not the one who helped start this mess. I leaned against my porch railing, sipping the bitter brew. "They're not mad at each other, Jenkins. They're mad at me. All roads lead back to the guy with the deed." He nodded, his eyes glinting with mischief. "You've got them running scared. But watch your back. Karen's not the type to let this slide." He wasn't wrong. Karen's first move came that afternoon, in the form of a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer, a slick type named Howard Grayson, whose letterhead screamed expensive. The letter was a masterclass in legal posturing, 3 pages of jargon about community easements, adverse possession, and cease and desist. It demanded I remove the chains immediately or face a lawsuit that would bury me in legal fees. I didn't flinch. I'd done my homework, and my grandfather's documents were airtight. I made an appointment with Grayson's office the next day, walking in with a folder of my own, the original deed to Willow Lake, the land grant for the parking lot, and the county's lease agreement from the 1940s. I slid the papers across his polished mahogany desk and watched his confidence erode with every page he turned. "This complicates things," Grayson muttered, adjusting his glasses. The HOA was under the impression the lake and lot were part of the development's common areas. "They were wrong," I said, leaning back in the chair. "And if you push this, I'll countersue for every fine you've slapped on me, every letter you've sent, and every drop of water you've dredged from my lake without permission." Grayson cleared his throat, his bravado gone. "I'll need to confer with my client." "You do that," I said, standing. "But tell Karen to read the fine print next time she tries to bully someone off their own land." By the time I got home, word had spread that the HOA's lawyer had backed down. The neighborhood's rumor mill was in overdrive, and I could feel the shift in the air. The residents who'd once sneered at my rustic cabin and unkempt yard were starting to whisper a different tune. Some even stopped by, not to complain, but to ask questions. "Is it true you own the lake?" one woman asked, clutching a dog leash. "Does that mean we can't use the boat ramp anymore?" "That's up to me now," I said, keeping my tone even. "But I'm not the one who started this fight." Karen, however, wasn't ready to surrender. The next evening, she showed up at my cabin, unannounced, carrying a bottle of expensive red wine and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her heels sank into the soft earth of my driveway as she approached. Her usual power suit traded for a softer look, jeans, a silk blouse, and a scarf that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. It was a calculated move, meant to disarm me. "James," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Can we talk? Just the two of us, neighbor to neighbor." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not inviting her in. "What's there to talk about, Karen? Your board's been trying to run me out for years. Now you're learning the cost of overreaching." She held up the wine bottle, as if it were a peace offering. "Let's be reasonable. We can work this out. The community needs that lot, and I'm sure we can come to an agreement that benefits everyone." I didn't take the bottle. I didn't even let her sit. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but unyielding, "your HOA tried to evict me from land my family's owned for generations. You sent me fines for my mailbox, my fence, even my grass. You thought you could bully me into submission. Now you're learning a lesson. Actions have consequences." Her smile vanished, replaced by a hard glint in her eyes. She set the wine bottle on the porch railing, her movements sharp. "You'll regret this, Carter," she said, her voice low and cold. "You're making enemies of an entire community." I stepped forward, just enough to make her take a step back. "Not as much as you already do," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "You've been ruling Maple Shores like it's your personal fiefdom, fining people into compliance, making enemies of anyone who doesn't fit your mold. I'm just the one who finally called your bluff." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car, leaving the wine bottle behind. I watched her taillights disappear down the gravel road, the dust settling in the twilight. The bottle sat untouched on the railing, a symbol of her failed charm offensive. I had no intention of drinking it. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of Willow Lake, checking the chains and signs I'd posted. They were still in place, untouched, though I noticed a few new tire tracks where someone had tried to park on the grass nearby. The lake was calm, its surface reflecting the golden hues of the sunrise. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, "This lake's got a soul, James." I wasn't just fighting for land or a parking lot. I was fighting for something bigger, something the HOA could never understand. Back at the cabin, my phone buzzed with a new email from Jenkins, forwarded from the HOA's community listserv. The board had issued a statement, claiming they were working diligently to resolve the property dispute and urging residents to remain calm. But the comments below the email told a different story. Residents were furious, divided, and starting to question the board's competence. "How did they not know about the deed?" one wrote. "What else are they hiding?" asked another. I leaned back in my chair, the deed folder open on the table before me. The neighborhood was fracturing, and the HOA's grip was slipping. Karen could threaten all she wanted, but I held the cards now. The chains weren't just on the parking lot, they were around the HOA's carefully curated illusion of control. Let them come for me. I was ready. Memorial Day weekend was Maple Shores' crown jewel, the event that defined the community's self-image as an idyllic, lakefront paradise. For years, the neighborhood had transformed Willow Lake into their personal playground, barbecues sizzling with burgers and hot dogs, kids shrieking as they splashed in the shallows, jet skis roaring across the water, and fireworks bursting in the night sky. The HOA marketed it as the pinnacle of community spirit, a tradition that justified their steep fees and rigid rules. But this year, as the holiday weekend dawned, they found my chains and padlocks waiting for them. I'd gated the boat ramp the day before, driving steel posts deep into the earth and stringing heavy chains across the entrance. Signs, printed in bold red letters, hung at regular intervals, "Private property. No trespassing. Owner, Carter family. The parking lot, still blocked from my earlier standoff, remained empty, its asphalt baking under the late May sun. Families arrived in droves, toting coolers, fishing poles, and inflatable rafts, only to stop short at the barriers. Confusion turned to frustration as they read the signs, their holiday plans crumbling before their eyes. I watched from my porch, a mug of coffee in hand, as the chaos unfolded. A man in a red polo shirt rattled the chain at the boat ramp, cursing loudly. A woman with a toddler on her hip waved her arms at the signs, as if they'd vanish if she protested hard enough. Kids, oblivious to the legal drama, whined about not being able to swim. One guy even tried to climb over the chain, only to retreat when he realized the padlock wasn't budging. The scene was almost comical, a parade of entitlement meeting an immovable wall of reality. By noon, the HOA board had called an urgent meeting in the clubhouse, the same polished room where I'd first dropped my bombshell weeks earlier. I didn't attend, but Jenkins, ever the reliable gossip, filled me in later. The room had been packed. Standing room only, with residents shouting over each other, demanding answers. Karen stood at the front, flanked by Richard and Linda, her usual composure fraying as she tried to deflect the blame. "We're working tirelessly to resolve this property dispute," she said, according to Jenkins, her voice tight with strain. "This is a complex legal matter, and we ask for your patience." But the residents weren't buying it. "You told us the lake was ours," one man shouted, his voice carrying through the open windows. "How did you not know about the deed?" demanded another. A woman in the back, Jenkins said, stood up and asked point-blank, "What else have you been lying about?" The room erupted, accusations flying like sparks. Karen tried to regain control, promising legal action and swift resolution, but the damage was done. Everyone knew the truth, the HOA had poked a bear, and now the whole community was paying the price. Meanwhile, I sat on my porch, the lake stretching out before me, its surface smooth and untouched. For the first time in years, it looked like it did when I was a boy, no loud music blaring from portable speakers, no jet skis carving up the water, no fireworks littering the shore with spent casings. Just the soft lapping of waves and the rustle of willows in the breeze. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice, telling me stories of fishing trips and summer nights when the lake was ours alone. Back then, it had been a refuge, a place where the world's noise couldn't reach. Now, it was mine again, and the silence felt like victory. Jenkins stopped by that afternoon, his thermos in hand, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "You should have seen their faces, Carter," he said, pouring me a cup. "They're acting like you stole their birthright. Half of them want to sue you, the other half want to fire the board." "Let them try," I said, leaning back in my chair. "They've got nothing but hot air and a lawyer who already knows he's outmatched." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a cold bastard, you know that. But I'll be damned if I don't admire it. You've got the whole neighborhood in a tizzy." I shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. It was as strong as ever, like drinking tar. "They brought this on themselves. All I did was take back what's mine." The rest of the weekend was a study in unraveling. Without access to the lake or the parking lot, Maple Shore's Memorial Day festivities fizzled out. The barbecue grills stayed cold, the boat ramp remained deserted, and the fireworks show was cancelled. No one could get close enough to set them off. Residents parked haphazardly along the streets, their cars jamming up the neighborhood like a clogged artery. Arguments broke out over blocked driveways and scratched bumpers. One particularly heated exchange, Jenkins reported, ended with a fistfight between two dads in a cul-de-sac, their kids watching wide-eyed from the sidewalk. Karen tried one last gambit on Sunday. She sent me an email, copied to the entire HOA board, proposing a temporary agreement to reopen the boat ramp for the holiday. She offered to pay a nominal fee for access, framing it as a gesture of goodwill. I didn't bother responding. The time for negotiation was long gone. She'd threatened to evict me, sent her lawyer to intimidate me, and even tried to charm me with a bottle of wine. Now she was scrambling, and I wasn't about to throw her a lifeline. By Monday evening, the neighborhood was a ghost town. The streets, usually alive with holiday chatter, were quiet, the residents either sulking in their homes or driving elsewhere to salvage their weekend. I walked down to the lake at dusk, the air warm and heavy with the scent of summer. The water was still, reflecting the fading light like a mirror. A lone heron stood at the edge, its silhouette stark against the glow. I thought of my grandfather, how he'd taught me to cast a line right there, his hand steady and sure. This was what I was fighting for, not just the land, but the memory of it, the soul of it. Back at the cabin, I checked my phone and found a new voicemail from Grayson, the HOA's lawyer. His tone was softer than before, almost conciliatory. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to discuss a resolution that avoids further escalation. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I deleted the message. They could wait. As night fell, I sat on my porch again, the crickets singing their endless song. The lake lay quiet, untouched by the chaos that had consumed Maple Shores. For the first time in years, I felt like I was home. The HOA could scramble, threaten, or beg all they wanted, but they'd crossed a line, and I wasn't backing down. The bear was awake, and Willow Lake was mine. The pressure on the Maple Shores HOA board had become a crucible, and it was only a matter of time before something, or someone, cracked. After the Memorial Day fiasco, the neighborhood's fragile unity unraveled like a cheap sweater. Homeowners, once content to nod along at meetings and pay their dues, turned on the board with a vengeance. They weren't angry at me anymore, they were furious with the HOA for dragging them into this mess. Emails flooded the board's inbox, demanding refunds for years of dues spent on a lake and parking lot they never legally owned. Some threatened lawsuits, not against me, but against the HOA for mismanagement and misrepresentation. Whispers of a recall election began to circulate, with Karen's name at the top of the chopping block. I heard it all through Jenkins, who'd become my unofficial spy, relaying the neighborhood's gossip with a gleam in his eye. "They're ready to burn the clubhouse down," he told me one morning, pouring coffee from his thermos. "Folks are saying Karen knew about the deed issue years ago and covered it up. Now they want her head." I leaned against my porch railing, the lake shimmering in the distance. "She built her castle on sand," I said. Sooner or later, the tide was gonna come in. At the next HOA meeting, Jenkins said, Karen's usual polish had faded. Her voice cracked as she tried to placate the crowd, promising legal reviews and open communication. But the residents weren't having it. A retired accountant stood up and demanded an audit of the HOA's finances, pointing out that their dues had funded unpermitted lake projects. A young couple, new to the neighborhood, asked why they'd been sold a house with lake access that didn't exist. Each question landed like a hammer, and Karen's answers grew thinner, her confidence eroding under the weight of her own missteps. The board's lawyer, Grayson, wasn't helping. After our meeting, he'd advised Karen to tread carefully, warning that my documents were ironclad. The HOA's claims of adverse possession or community easements had crumbled under scrutiny, leaving them with no legal leverage. Karen was cornered, and the neighborhood could sense it. The once untouchable president, who'd ruled Maple Shores with an iron grip and a smile, now looked fragile, her authority slipping through her fingers like water. Then came the day she showed up at my cabin. It was late afternoon, the sun low and golden over Willow Lake, casting long shadows across my driveway. I was splitting firewood when I heard the crunch of gravel. I looked up to see Karen walking toward me, alone. No clipboard, no board members, no power suit. Just Karen, in a plain sweater and jeans, her shoulders slumped, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't look like the tyrant who'd sent me eviction notices or tried to charm me with a bottle of wine. She looked human, someone in over her head, drowning in the consequences of her own hubris. I set the axe down, wiping my hands on my jeans. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, my voice steady but not unkind. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze flickering to the lake before meeting mine. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, her voice stripped of its usual edge. "To fix this. To make it right." I studied her, taking in the lines etched around her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted at her sides. She wasn't here to fight or negotiate. She was here to surrender. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Respect," I said, crossing my arms. "And for your HOA to leave me and my land alone. No more fines, no more notices, no more threats about my mailbox or my fence or my grass. I've been on this land my whole life, Karen. My family's been here for generations. You don't get to tell me how to live on it." She nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "And the lot? The lake?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if she dreaded the answer. "We'll discuss terms," I said, my tone firm. "But on my rules, not yours. No more HOA ultimatums. No more lawyers trying to bully me. You want access to my land, you come to me with an offer that respects what's mine." She stood there, silent, the weight of her defeat settling over her like dust. For a moment, I thought she might argue, try to claw back some shred of control. But she just nodded again, her shoulders sagging further. "I'll talk to the board," she said finally. "We'll figure something out." "Good," I said, picking up the axe again. "You know where to find me." She turned and walked back to her car, her steps slow and deliberate, as if each one cost her something. I watched her drive away, the dust rising in her wake, and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and quiet resolve. This wasn't the end, not yet, but it was a turning point. The HOA's reign was crumbling, and for the first time, I held the upper hand. That evening, I walked down to Willow Lake, the air cool and crisp, the water reflecting the last of the day's light. The heron was back, standing sentinel at the shore, its stillness a mirror to the peace I'd fought to reclaim. I thought of my grandfather, his calloused hands teaching me to bait a hook, his stories of a time when this land was just ours and the lake's. I'd spent years watching Maple Shores encroach, their rules and fees chipping away at what was mine. Now, I'd taken it back, not with threats or posturing, but with the truth. Jenkins stopped by the next morning, his thermos in hand, his grin wider than ever. "Heard Karen stepping down," he said, pouring me a cup. "Not official yet, but the board's in shambles. Half of them want to settle with you, the other half are still talking lawsuits, but they know they've got no case." I took a sip, the coffee as bitter as always. "They can talk all they want," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He laughed, slapping his knee. "You're a stubborn son of a gun, Carter. Remind me never to cross you." I smiled, looking out at the lake. "Just don't try to steal my land, Jenkins, and we'll be fine." The neighborhood was still in upheaval, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The chains on the lot and the boat ramp stayed up, a reminder to Maple Shores that some things couldn't be bought or bullied. Karen might come back with an offer, or she might not. Either way, I was ready to set the terms. Willow Lake was mine, and no HOA could change that. In the end, I didn't bleed them dry. I could have. I could have charged outrageous fees, or shut them out forever. But I wasn't like them. Instead, I drafted a contract. Maple Shores could continue to use the lot and the lake, but only with my written permission and only if they recognized, in writing, that neither the HOA nor its board had authority over my land. They signed, desperate for peace. The residents returned to their parking spaces, their boats, their summer parties. But things had changed. Every time they looked at the lake, they knew it wasn't theirs. It was mine. Karen resigned shortly after, her reputation in tatters. A new board was elected, one that kept its distance from me. And I kept my cabin, my family's legacy, and something sweeter than revenge, the silence of victory.